Hello, and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. Hello there, thank you so much for joining me. Today, I'm joined by Chrissy Messick, a dog trainer, behavioral consultant, animal communicator, and fellow podcaster who helps dog parents set the foundations to build a happy and healthy relationship with their dogs. I just love this conversation because Chrissy really takes a holistic approach to how we help our dogs navigate this world, and by proxy, how this helps us to better navigate the world. Chrissy shares how she grew up around animals, but then entered a career in sports medicine, even working at the Olympic Games. But it was her experience in volunteering at the local Humane Society, along with working with a life coach and then taking animal communication courses, that served as a huge pivot and took Chrissy down the path of working with dogs and their humans from a whole dog perspective. Chrissy shares how her first dogs with her husband served as incredible teachers for her that have even informed the way that she parents her children. She also talks about reframing training to teaching our dogs, how dogs are supporting us in coming back to our own bodies, and how we can better develop our relationships with our dogs by making sure to create opportunities for both passive and active being. Chrissy also shares wisdom that dogs have shared with her and her clients through animal communication sessions, so you're not going to want to miss that. But before we dive in, just a quick note that this episode is sponsored by Aspirationary, which in full transparency is another project of mine where we create books, notebooks, and stationery to support you in becoming all you aspire to be. I'm really excited to announce that we have released a Spanish language version of our popular My First Period tracker for young girls and tweens in order to increase menstrual literacy and empower young people to become advocates for their menstrual health. You can learn more about our books on our Instagram, which is Aspirationary, and that's spelled Aspirationery. Okay, on that note, let's go. Hi, Chrissy. Thank you so much for joining me on the Mystic Dog Mama podcast today. I'm so excited you're here.
Hello. I'm excited to be here too. We're going to talk about so many awesome things.
So many awesome things. I love it so much. But just to give the audience a little bit of a background on why I wanted to talk to you, you have such an interesting kind of approach to dog training and looking at behavior and our relationships with our dogs that I think would be so beneficial for people to hear about, especially if they're struggling with their dog or they just want to develop a deeper connection. And one of the things that you and I have in common is both doing animal communication. And I love that you are bringing that into that realm. And I'd love for you to kind of, in the course of our conversation, dive into how you're using some of those principles to better understand dogs, helping owners to better understand their dogs and themselves. And we'll look at as well the nature of animals from your perspective. So I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, so many good things.
So many good things. Do you mind kind of giving us a little bit of a background of how you got into dog training in the first place and what your connection with dogs and with animals was in your kind of younger years as well?
Yeah, well, gosh. So I actually grew up in Washington State and we lived on top of a mountain in a trailer. And, my childhood wasn't great growing up, but I did have access to the woods and nature. And we had kind of a farm. And I spent a lot of time with the animals, like with the ducks. I would jump in the pond with them. And, we had our dogs and pigs and chickens and roosters, and we just spent a lot of time with them. And our neighbors had some horses. And I just remember one time, I don't know how this happened, but they put me on the horse bareback and the horse took off running through the woods. And I'm like 10 years old and I'm holding on for dear life. My first time on a horse, and this horse is jumping over logs. And I was like, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. So I just curled up in a ball and held on to the horse's mane. And then we went right back to the barn. And then I was like, whoa, that was kind of fun. And so I just a lot of time with animals growing up. And then going into college, I ended up getting my degree in sports medicine. And I remember I went to Washington State and I was thinking, am I going to do I want to go to vet school or am I going to do, human medicine? And I remember distinctly thinking, I don't know if I can handle vet school because I don't think I can handle seeing the dogs and animals in pain. And
Mm.
so I ended up choosing, going into sports medicine. And so I did that for 20 years. I, worked at the Olympics. I worked at the 2000 Olympics with women's soccer and the 2004 Olympics with women's basketball. And I worked at University of Washington for, oh gosh, I would say 11 years, I think. I worked with men's and women's rowing and volleyball and tennis and softball. So I did that. And then I started having kids. And, I was like, I don't think I can work 90 hours a week and travel every weekend and raise a family like I want to raise a family. So we moved to Colorado. And I just started working with clients individually. And then I was just laughing at myself because I couldn't do that anymore because I was so used to working with super motivated humans and athletes to heal and get better that I was like, I can't stand it that people aren't wanting to get better and not doing the stuff. And so at that point, I was like, okay, I need to do something else. So I started volunteering at the Humane Society and went directly into the behavior and training center. And the more I started working with the animals and learning about behavior, I was like, this is just like my sports medicine stuff. We evaluate the dog, we see what's going on, and then we come up with a plan, and then we just, work out the plan and get them back to going to where they need to go. And so it was very similar. And so it felt very similar. And so that's kind of how I started, doing that. And then at the same time, while I was working at the training center, or sorry, at the same time when I was volunteering at the Humane Society, I was learning about animal communication as well. So I was kind of doing them together, parallel. And then 7 years ago, when I started my training business, I just kind of integrated everything. And so I've been kind of doing them both, parallel and together at the same time. And I kind of mix it all together. So that's kind of been my journey and where I am now. And now my kids are 17 and 14, two girls. And so that's kind of how it all started. And when my husband and I got married, we were like, let's get let's get two dogs and let's learn how to be good parents.
Yeah.
And so the dogs, they taught us everything. And this is before I got into, dog training. And so, they taught us so much and, taught us what not to do, what to do. And one of the dogs, Zoe, she's the one that kind of got me into dog training. So I started with her and then started volunteering at the Humane Society. So that's kind of how it all came together.
That's amazing. There's always a dog that pushes those of us that work in this industry into it. They're a gateway dog.
Yeah, they totally are. And looking back now, like I did the best I could. But no, just looking back, like she had separation anxiety, she had a bunch of medical issues, she was fearful of things. Like I just, I think intuitively I was able to work really well with her, just, intuitively. But then after I learned the practical stuff, I was like, okay, just put it all together. And yeah, so she's the one that really drove me to dog training and learning about it.
Oh, I love it. I'm curious too because it seems like coming from a sports medicine background and from that kind of perspective of, okay, we figure out what's going on, we come up with a plan, etc. That's a really like what I would say is more of like a rational and logical kind of approach to things. And then that you brought in the animal communication stuff too at the same time that you were in that kind of world. What opened you up to animal communication? I want to hear about like how you got into that. That's so cool.
Yeah, because the sports medicine very science based, and I actually started working with a life coach, and we just kind of worked our way to that. And for me, I was like, what? Like, why am I doing this? And she was like, I don't know anything about this either. I'm out of here. And so I was like, okay. So I just, I went to these, Psychic Horizons in Boulder where I live. And I just started taking classes, and I was just thinking to myself, what am I doing? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And, so in my head about everything. But I was like, well, I'm here, something brought me here. I'm just going to learn. And like, if it just helps me with my healing, I'll do it. And so I did like a year-long program just working on, learning how to run your own energy, learning how to heal yourself. And then when I did that, then I got into the animal communication courses and started doing that. And man, this process was so much work of learning how to get out of my head and into my body, and then creating that mind body connection, where you're working with your heart and your mind. And I just think so many people have lost that just intuitive sense. So many people are in their mind nowadays that we need to learn to get back into our body and have that, that mind heart connection. Um, yeah, so I think learning how to integrate them both has really helped me work with dogs as a whole, the holistic approach.
Oh, definitely. And that's been my experience too. I think that, especially in the West as a culture, we also really validate being in our heads. Like we see that as something to strive for, as being successful, of like be if you're intelligent, etc. That um that's kind of like what we think we should be, instead of understanding that that's great. And it's like the and thing. We are human beings in a body for a reason, and our bodies are so full of wisdom that we're actually totally cut off from when we just are focusing on the heads. And for me personally, and I'd love to hear if this has been your experience too, I feel like because dogs are such heart-centered beings, and we know that they have the biggest heart per body mass of any being, like they are totally heart energy, and a lot of what drives them is it's not so much mental, even though we tend to focus on that a lot in the way that we are engaging with them. That's sort of secondary, but they really are like magnetically drawn to things. They're so heart-based, and I think that that's why we as a species brought them into our lives, because they are really teaching us how to get centered again. And I wonder like what your thoughts are on that, and then also how that translates into the way that you're working as a trainer and a behavior consultant too. How that intuitive and more somatic awareness that you have has informed the way that you're then engaging with dogs.
Yeah, I mean, that's just all the time. I think dogs are here to help us to learn how to get back into our bodies. Like that's, they are such big, huge teachers for us. And the kind of people that I like to work with are people that are open to learning about what their dog is teaching them and not just want to fix their dog. Um, because if you're open, they can teach you so many things. And that's how I approach, when I'm working with people and their dogs. It's more like, yeah, I can show you the practical skills. Definitely need the practical skills to help your dog and stuff. But then let's look at what's going on with you. Like, how are you responding to, your dog's behavior? Like, and how can we help you respond to that? And what tools can we give you to help your dog feel safe? And then what daily activities can you guys do together to learn to trust and to engage with each other? And so the practical tools of daily living, skills to work on, timing, mechanics, that kind of thing. But then also just being quiet and getting into your body and just having that connection with your dog. And we can do that by, and so this isn't a practical skill. This is a relationship skill. We were just talking about this a second ago. Well, 5-10 minutes ago. But like for when we go on a walk with our dog, so many people are into the habit of, I need to do something, I need to get something done. But going on a walk with our dog is the perfect time to disconnect. Like, here's what we need to do. We need to not listen to music, not listen to podcasts, I'm sorry to say. you know, Take out the earplugs and get into your body and pay attention to your dog. Like, smell, feel, hear, watch your dog. What are they doing? Like, for me, when I'm doing day training with clients, like the dogs crack me up all the time. Like just watching them like sniff everything and watching them interact with their environment, it can teach you so much about your dog. So that's the perfect time to just connect and be with your dog. They are hilarious. Like, and then you start to have these just intuitive, thoughts, feelings, emotions that come to you. And so that's the perfect way to like combine intuitive being with practical skills. Did I
Yeah.
answer your question even?
Yeah, you did. No,
Okay.
I love that. I love that so much because it's something that we're doing every day anyways. And so when you offer a reframe, and it makes me think of a conversation I had with Wendy Welpton, who is a natural movement coach. And she was talking about how you could actually so again to the point of like we're so unaware of our bodies and how do we actually use our everyday activities like lifting something up to a top shelf, for example, and to move differently, to support our bodies with this idea of like, how do we support ourselves for the body that we want and the life we want to have when we're like 90? You're
Mhm.
you're building the body and how that isn't necessarily about going to the gym. Sure, that's part of it, but it's also how are you moving the rest of the day? That's important. And so
Mhm.
then reframing the dog walk as an opportunity for you to move differently. And she was saying, like, look how playful your dog is. Look how
Mhm.
your dog is engaging with curiosity in the environment. Can you do that same thing?
Right.
And I mean, it was such an eye opener of like, yeah, it is about these wonderful little opportunities that how can we be more curious about the way that we're moving in our environment or the way that even still using the dog walk as an example, we tend to want to just go in a linear fashion, right? We're going from point A to point B. I have
Mhm.
not yet met a dog that naturally so this isn't about being taught to walk differently, but naturally would choose to walk in a straight line, right? Like they
Uh-huh.
love to
Yeah.
meander. They
Yeah.
love to sniff and like can we learn from that?
Yeah. And it makes me so sad when I see people trying to have their dogs heel right next to them and go just not sniff anything, not explore. And I can understand like if there's a trigger, like another dog coming and you're working like, okay, now's the time when I just want you to walk next to me and focus on me and, not ignore the other dog or work on skills to create a different association with that other dog. So there's times for it, but like the rest of the time, let them, yeah, sniff and explore and be natural in the environment. We've one thing that is hard is like we've taken so many choices away from them by the way, we tell them when they're going to go to the bathroom, we tell them when they're going to eat, we control so much of their lives, like just the times that they have choice, give them choices, give them choices, let them have that choice. That's a whole confidence building thing too.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's so reflective as well of how we have become captive ourselves, that we have become domesticated, that we trap ourselves in particular ways of being, of what we think we should be doing, etc., and don't necessarily allow ourselves that same level of freedom. And that's another lesson I think that we can learn from them. When we start to allow our dogs to have that kind of freedom, there is an automatic translation where you start to become a little bit more aware of like, where am I boxing myself in? Where am I not
Right.
allowing myself to explore? That kind of a thing too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you, I'm kind of curious, through the animal communication line of work, when you've been working with clients, has there been anything that's been really surprising for you that's come through, that's made you think a little bit differently or been able to help support the guardian in better working with their dogs?
I think I think the thing that comes through is that, whenever I connect with them, it's always something so simple. I feel like we make things really difficult for ourselves and for our dogs. And, I think it's actually typically really simple, except if there's a medical issue going on and like really learning how to dive in and see what's going on. So, we can say, hey, why don't you talk to your vet and just ask them what they think about this, that kind of thing. But I think on the, like, so for instance, I did a reading with a dog and she's like, can you, tell me, what he needs more of and this kind of stuff. And so I connected with him and, he said he wants to have more of your attention. And she said, well, I do. Like we hang out all the time. And I said, no, it's not hanging out. It's more interactive. So there's a difference between being like hanging out with your dog and interacting with your dog. And so it's just simple things like that, that it's just a little like creating a little awareness, and it's not as complicated as we think it is, I think.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I have those same messages, but it's funny you should bring that specific thing up because I got called out on that with Lucky, my dog. And I I just so I have like a little group of friends who we've done animal communication together, and one in particular, we go back and forth with things. And I said to her, and I've mentioned it on the podcast too, that I think when you're starting off with animal communication, it's often a lot easier for you to work with someone else's animal because you
Mhm.
don't hold those same those doubts about being able to do it. And because you're not as familiar, you're not any intuitive hit that you're getting that actually is an intuitive hit. If it's with your own dog, you're probably going to dismiss it at first, like, oh, but I already knew that. And
Yeah.
so I asked her for fun if she would connect with Lucky, and she's Mexican. And she said to me, she was like, I wasn't sure because Lucky is Mexican, like actually from Mexico, and he's a Chihuahua. And she's like, I didn't know if I should communicate with him in Spanish. And she was like, but obviously, like, it doesn't matter. But it was so funny because he did say to her, I had just been on a trip for a few days. And I'm also very conscious of the fact that he gets worried about those sorts of things. So I was using animal communication ahead of time to prepare him for it and visualize like how many nights, how many sleeps I was going to be away and what, how he was going to be cared for and all that. And that definitely helped. She said to him, or he said to her, she just didn't bother with me. Like in this and in the attitude that he actually has. And I was like, "What?" And she was like, "Yeah, he kind of feels like you just don't bother with him." And I was like, "Oh my God." And that was a gut punch because like
Yeah.
he is my absolute world, but I am now conscious of how many times do I find myself saying to him, just a minute, Bubba, in a minute, Bubba, I got
Yeah.
to do this, Bubba, those, that kind of a thing. And so
Mhm.
stopping when I can and actually like properly engaging with him. But he also said to her, which I thought was really funny, he was like, Me gusta mi pollito in Spanish. He said this to her. Like,
I like my
I
something.
I like my chicken.
Uh,
He's got an intolerance to chicken, so he doesn't get it very often. But she said he was doing it in this like demanding tone of like me gusta mi pollito. Like if she's not gonna bother with me, at least she can give me my mi pollito.
oh my gosh, that's so funny. What's so funny too is the other thing I just thought of, like, doing the readings. Like Well, you were talking about it's easier to read other, not your own dog because it's easier to stay neutral. And, that's one thing that when you start reading is learning how to stay neutral. That's a huge thing. Um, but anyway, I just talking about reading like my clients' dogs, the other thing that is hilarious is they come through as certain personalities. Like one of them, she's a cattle dog, a healer, and she always comes through as like the diva. She talks like, "Hey girl, what's going on?" Like diva voice. And then her brother who lives with her, he's like a beagle, and he always comes through like, "Hey dude, what's up?" Like, "I'm the man," that kind of thing. It's so it's so I these readings are hilarious. Like just talking with these animals, it just always makes me laugh. So that's the other thing that's really fun is they just come through, as certain certain ways, and it's hilarious.
It's so funny, and it's so true. They do definitely have like energetic personalities that you just can't miss. That you feel it on a certain level. And
Yeah.
I also think it's really interesting, going back to what you were saying, that it's really simple things that the dogs want. I've even found in reading for dogs that have passed, so they're not so much giving information on like what they want in their current state, but more like what the learning was from the relationship with their human too. It's
Mhm.
still super simple.
Yeah,
It,
it
it
is.
really is about just like the love, and they don't think about, they're not focused on the problems or the health issues or what you didn't do for them, or like that you were kind of like not necessarily bothering with them in Lucky's case, that kind of thing. They remember the stuff that you did do. And I
Mhm.
think that's also an important thing to kind of take away when we're, for me anyways, of when we're thinking about our relationships with our dogs, not to hold that kind of like shame and guilt of like, oh, I should have done more. Like they're not thinking like that whatsoever, because they are so heartless. They are so in a state of presence and love that it's so incomprehensible to us because we struggle with that.
Right. And then talking about simple things, I had a client who she asked me to do a reading with her dog because he was terrified of being in the car. Like he was scared of being in the car, the whole car thing. And so I was like, sure. So I did a reading, and immediately the word that came up was, "I feel vulnerable." And that was the word. And so I was like, okay, instead of coming up with a let's just try this first, like more of a management type thing. So because a lot of times people just want the easiest thing. And so we could come up with a management thing. We could come up with a training plan, which would take longer. And we could, get a vet check to make sure there's nothing medical going on. There's all these things that we could do. But I said, so he feels vulnerable. Why don't we do this? Come up with a plan of creating a safe space for him in the car where he's, like he feels safe. And so she came up with something that felt good to her. And so then, later that week, she's like, he's fine now. And so it's like, okay, we don't need to do any complicated things. We don't need to go down a rabbit hole. So there's so many different approaches that we can do just by doing that reading. Like that information came up. And then if that, wasn't helpful, we can look at more like the medical aspect. We can look at a training plan to create a different association. So there's all these, this is the holistic approach that we're talking about.
Mhm.
So anyway.
No, I love that. And I think it's so important. I actually think that's more, we've talked about in past conversations with one another that we're seeing it, it might be at a slow level, but we are seeing that some of the more holistic approaches, including animal communication, are starting to filter into the mainstream approaches to, in your case, the behavior world, in my case, the nutrition world. That is starting to happen more. And I think it is because we're starting to see the benefits of it. Like we can't treat things as isolated things that are existing in silos. Like we have to look at the full perspective. And you and I have talked about the link between things like behavior and nutrition, for example, and even how behavior can point to me as a nutritionist, there's something going on there it's not so much about needing to counter condition the dog to this. There's an imbalance in the body that needs to be addressed. When
Mhm.
we address that, then you can work with the training when they're in a state to be receptive. And so I think it's so exciting having these conversations of bringing all these different disciplines together. So we're treating the whole dog. We're helping the
Right.
whole dog. And hopefully that is translating for the pet parent as well, to start to look at themselves as a whole person. That
Mhm.
your dog really is your sacred mirror. It's such an invitation to look at how are you loving yourself? How are you truly appreciating and integrating your full self too?
Yeah. And it's, you know, the important thing is people have to be open to like not projecting like I need to fix my dog. This is wrong with my dog. I need to fix my dog. It's like let's look at your dog and then let's look at you. And I'm not saying like, it's the human's fault all the time. I'm just saying like it's a two-way relationship and let's work on it together. And with animal communication, talking about that, it's not a regulated field either. And so you can have some wackos, doing animal communication, giving you this terrible information, which I've seen before, and it just is frustrating. Um, so if anybody is looking for that, make sure you're looking for someone who has gone through courses, who is certified, um, just kind of not just kind of randomly doing it. Same
Hmm.
thing with dog training. It's unregulated. So you can have anybody be it, say they're a dog trainer and they have no education, and so you have people that don't know about, apply learning theory. They don't know the species, the canine species. And so, they're just using all these horrible punishment techniques to stop the behavior instead of getting to the root of the problem. And so, anyway, that's just, I'm going off on a tangent, but, dog training is not regulated, animal communication is not regulated. So, find people that have those certifications and that education and that practical experience. So,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
my
It's
soapbox for now.
no, well, I'm up there with you because we have the same issue in nutrition as well, that it's not a regulated field. And I've seen, unfortunately, a lot of people that have come to me with like recipes that were done by a nutritionist, and you're just looking at it like, oh my God, what? Please don't do this. Please don't feed this to your dog. And
Right.
I think some wisdom, and I wonder if you would agree with this too, that I always advise, and this speaks to what you were saying of coming back into our bodies. If somebody is recommending something to you that fundamentally does not feel right,
Mhm.
trust that.
Yeah.
Trust it, right? Like learn to trust your gut or wherever it is that you feel it in your body, because we experience that kind of hit of intuition differently. But I think so much of what I'm experiencing in my own practice within the nutrition world and within my own kind of spiritual practice too, of where we're at collectively, is we are really being invited to like reclaim our own sense of agency, to reclaim our own wisdom, and applying it in ways where if you just feel like something's off, it probably is off. Or it doesn't mean it's off for everyone, but it's off for you. And being okay with saying that's not right for me and my dog. I'm going to move over to something else. But
Mhm.
it is my hope that more and more people are 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 coming to this sense of like just recognizing like you have the wisdom within you. You really do. And it's our job to kind of like peel away the conditioning that's been applied over that we've been told only trust the white coats, only trust other people to validate your experience, and actually saying like it's okay that this isn't right for me, and move on to somebody that does feel good for you.
Yeah. And I mean, I went through that with Zoe, our boxer dog, and we were having issues and I was like, I need help. And so I went somewhere that looked, great, like all the marketing skills were really good. And then like I went to two sessions and I was like, I got upset stomach. It was, and even the quote unquote trainer, I was like, my dog is getting ready to attack the dog right next to it. Like, can you do something? And he completely ignored me. And of course, she attacked the other dog. And I was like, okay, I'm done with this. Like, this is ridiculous. And so, but I thought they were the expert. And, I had all these like things and I should have just trusted myself. And I did eventually, but, I felt bad for Zoe, but I think that was one of the things she was teaching me was, on my path to dog training and stuff. And so, yeah, really learning how to trust and then using critical thinking skills, like researching on your own. Like, yeah, yeah, because there's so much stuff out there on social media where everybody looks like an expert and there's so much to dig through nowadays.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the overwhelm for us as pet parents is, and
Mhm.
that was certainly what led me to study canine nutrition was I was just seeing so much stuff when I was trying to figure out what to do with Lucky and his health conditions. So much of it was contradictory. And I just didn't know where to turn. And I was like, well, I'm just going to learn this for myself. So I at least feel like I know what I'm doing. But not everybody's in a position or wants to go and do that. So it's hard. It's really hard.
Hard.
And I
Yeah.
appreciate the overwhelm. I totally
Mhm.
appreciate it.
Yeah, it is hard and just baby steps.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
definitely. Definitely. Well, I'm curious too, like what would you've talked about some things that people can do, like being more present when you're on the walk with your dog and being a little bit curious about how they're engaging with their environments. What are some other ways that people can that you feel would be helpful for them to start developing a better relationship with their dog that they could do easily themselves that would also help them to connect a little bit more intuitively to their dog and to themselves eventually?
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to figure out this little meditation that you can do with your dog. That's something I'm working on. But but I think the biggest thing is one for us as a human to start learning how to get into your own body. Like just sitting there and getting out of your head and feeling your body, smelling, like going out in the backyard, going into nature, just learning how to get in your body. And there's many different ways that people can do that, meditation, walking in the woods, those kind of things. But the other thing that you can do with your dog is to just, like I said, going on walks and watching them, but playing with them, like seeing how they play, like just watch their body language, their face, just having an awareness of what is really fun for them, interacting with them. Like, do they like to go on hikes? Do they like to play in the water? Or do they like to play fetch? Do they like to play with other dogs? Like what just spend time watching them interact. And then also like when you're in the backyard, just hang out with them. Just sit there and just be with them. So there's like kind of a passive being and then there's an interactive being. And so I would say it's just getting curious about what they're doing. So it's not, and you can be curious like when you're playing with them or watching them, or even when you're teaching them things. Like if you're quote unquote training, I like to call it teaching, um, is just pay attention to how they learn even. When I'm teaching dogs and humans how to, work on foundations of like, say, hand targeting or something. I just, we have a very specific way of doing it, and every dog is different in how they learn it. Some dogs are like, "Oh yeah, I'm there," like really quick, and they get it really quick. And then some dogs are like, "I don't know about this," like. And so it's more about watching how they learn and adjusting your response to how they learn, because a lot of times people just want a quick, instant response from their dog. Some dogs have a hard time in a busy environment,
Mhm.
and so we need to make it really easy for them. And it might take them, a longer time for them to respond if you give them like a cue. It might take them, like 5 seconds. And some dogs, it's like a second. And so just being aware of how they learn is really important, and you can tailor your teaching and training to that. Um, and that it builds so much trust with them. Like there's so many different ways to build trust. But anyway, so that's another way that people can just really learn how to build a relationship with their dog.
Oh, that's so helpful. And that took me a while to learn, I have to say. I was guilty of following what I thought was like the methods that you were supposed to do, like your dog, the kind of traditional positive reinforcement methods. And I quickly realized some of my issues with Lucky are him being a pandemic pup. And so
Mhm.
he's got particular issues that are related to not having been exposed to a lot of things. And so he is a little bit of a neophobe, like new things, regardless of what they are, worry him.
Mhm.
And I found kind of haphazardly, this was sort of like something he forced upon me that was a huge mirror for me too, of like actually being okay. I make jokes that he's a little bit of an old man, that he loves to just sit at benches and
Mhm.
watch things. And
Mhm.
I used to be of the mindset, nope, we gotta push
Mhm.
through. We gotta go and do all
Yeah.
these things. And we're getting to here, and I'm doing some training with you on this, and
Yeah.
oh man.
I know,
I
right?
I I love you, past version of myself. Oh man. But
I know.
it's so hard until I just finally like was like, he just wants to sit at a bench. Like, let's just sit at a bench and allow him to do it. And the more I did that, the more I actually came to understand exactly what you're talking about, Chrissy, that part of his learning was he's an observer from
Mhm.
a distance.
Mhm.
So he watches things, whether that's cars going by, it's other dogs playing, it's people walking by, whatever. He likes to watch things where he feels calm at a distance. It's not so much me getting him near those things and then giving him a load of treats, right?
Right.
He does way, some dogs do great with that. He
Right.
doesn't. He does
Yeah.
way better when we're just sitting at the bench and we're 30 feet away from something and he can just curiously watch it. And I can
Mhm.
even talk to him and I say things, whether or not this is right. You could correct me with this, but I'll tell him like, I'm sort of explaining what I'm seeing. Like, yeah, that guy's over there, and look, oh, he's got this, and oh, that dog looks really nice, doesn't, like I'm having like a little conversation with him. And but he's like, he is engaging with me and he's engaging with that thing. And I've noticed that not only was that like button pressing for me of it should be different. Like I had to do a whole 180 reframe of like, okay, I guess training today and I guess the walk today is going to be 30 minutes of sitting at the bench. But how quickly he has progressed in being comfortable with things by
Mhm.
me actually giving into that. And I should just bring snacks for me too. And we just sit there at a bench for the walk.
I know. It's so, see, once again, it's simple, isn't it? Like, how simple? And he's like, Mom, really, you're making this too hard. But like, yeah, we don't need to force anything. What does our dog want to do? Why do we feel like we need to force a dog to walk by a dog 5 feet away when the dog doesn't want to walk, like why do we have to do that? Like, it's just, pay attention to what your dog is telling you and work in that range. And then, like you said, over time, you'll be able to sit like 10 feet away and he's good. You know what I mean? And the thing is, there's no time frame. Like some dogs, it might take a week. Some dogs, it might take 5 months. Like, just go at your dog's own pace, and it's a relationship. You're learning how they learn, and they're learning to trust you, that you're not going to force a situation.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's like such a subtle thing, but it's just a huge mindset shift that makes all the difference in the world.
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And I just see, like I said, very forgiving of my past self because it's like, oh my God, I cannot believe I did that to him because I thought like you got to get him closer to the thing he's terrified of and then shove treats in his mouth. And it's like, actually, he was fine just sitting and watching from 20 feet away.
Yeah.
Why did I press this? But
Yeah, and that's the whole thing too, is like, a lot of people feel like they're doing positive reinforcement, but it's a very specific way of doing it. And, counter conditioning, desensitization, counter conditioning is definitely not like forcing them to get close and then putting treats in their mouth. Like, there's a very specific way that we do this, and it's starting at a safe distance. And then when they get comfortable at that distance, then we get a little bit closer,
Hmm.
and treats are happening. And so there's that whole thing too, where we just need to make sure, if we're doing a certain way of changing an association, we need to make sure, are we doing this right? I'm not sure. You know what
Right.
I mean?
Right. Well, I became aware too how much of this is actually me manipulating him. You
Right.
know, like that is that any better? Like I didn't I became aware of how much I was doing that. And why do I need him to be okay with being in these situations? Granted, there are obviously things we do want to make them as comfortable as we can in the things they're encountering in their lives, for sure. But how much of it was coming from just me needing him to be different? Me
Right.
needing, you know what I mean? Like it was my issue. It wasn't his issue. And
Right.
how much I've realized that reflects back to me where I feel like I should be like a certain way in certain situations. And then it's like it's like, oh, the deep dive. This goes so deep, you little Buddha. You are teaching me so much.
I know they do. And it just reminds me of this person in our neighborhood they have two dogs and they both are very reactive. And my dog, she can be, have reactive behaviors as well, but she has like eight doggy friends now. And she's happy with them. And so I'm very aware of walking in the neighborhood, which dogs she does well with and who she has a hard time with. And so, but when I know it's a dog that she's going to have a hard time with, I give her distance. Like we give distance and, so she feels safe. But what I notice about this other person is they know that their dog is struggling, but for some reason they feel the need to, like, my dog needs to walk right next to this thing that scares them. You know what I mean? And I don't understand that. I think it's just a lack of awareness, and so instead of, like helping their dog feel safe and giving, distance, they 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 want to walk right next to this thing that scares them. And so um it's just a matter of like helping people develop awareness of, like you said, why do I feel the need to that for my dog to walk right next to this thing that scares them? And so anyway, it's just a thought that came into my head,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's that developing that awareness. It's like
Yeah.
these developing these little baby awarenesses.
It is. It is, and it
Mhm.
accumulates. It
Yeah.
totally is. Well, it reminds me as you're saying that, I for years have suffered from vertigo when I'm at like steep heights. It's like if you've never experienced vertigo, it's the weirdest thing. You have no control over it. It's everything just starts spinning in
Yeah.
front of you, and that makes it really hard to kind of navigate. And I remember I hiked a really steep gorge. Was the first time I really experienced it, and it terrified me because the consequence of slipping was like death, you know. So then I
Yeah.
had like that hanging over me. And I remember, people have said to me throughout the years, you just need to get over it. You just need to keep doing this. And so the last time I did it, I went on a hike. I was visiting some friends in New Zealand and they're totally into hiking. And we went up this mountain and I was in absolute tears. Like they're having the time of their lives. And I'm like, oh my God, how do I get myself out of this situation? This is literally the worst. This is my worst nightmare.
Yeah.
And I kind of had this conversation with myself as I'm going down the mountain, everything's spinning in front of me, and I'm just hoping to God I don't die on the way. It's like, I get that this is fun for other people. This isn't for me. And actually putting myself in these scary situations
Yeah.
doesn't actually make me less afraid of
Right.
the situation. In fact, it's just reinforcing it for me. So it's kind of like the same thing with our dogs, that making them walk by something without the proper prep, right?
Mhm.
Without like you're saying, working at a distance and going at their own pace and all. Like if I'd gone on some maybe not so steep mountains, that probably would have been a little bit of a better learning opportunity for me. But it's like throwing them in at the deep end. can make it way, way worse. And so thinking about like how many times in your life have you had that kind of experience? Did it ever really work for you? Probably not,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, exactly. So it's really, wow, it's looking inward and saying, why am I needing this?
Yeah,
So
I think that's so much of what dogs are asking us to do is that inner work. And when we're open to it, when we're, like you were saying, like working with people who are actually ready for that, it's amazing what you can discover about yourself. It's like just an onion with like layer and layer and layer and layer. It just keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper. It's amazing. It's really
yeah.
amazing.
And the
Yeah.
difference is like we are not just fixing the dog, we are changing your whole life. We are changing the human's life, the dog's life, when we're doing it this way. And if we're finding the root cause and we're looking at the two-way relationship, the behaviors that you were concerned about just kind of suddenly go away. It's, you know, so it's a combination of, yeah, skills and tools, but also the internal work as well.
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it so much. Chrissy, you have some amazing ways that people can engage with you. How, if people want to learn more about what you're doing, or if they want a session, or if they want to do some training work with you, how can they reach you?
So you can go to my website, www.theanimalnature.com. Um, and we were just talking about this. I have a quiz, and it's called How Well Do You Know Your Dog? And I think you can just put the link in the notes. I'm not quite sure how you want to do
Mhm.
that, but that's kind of a fun way to kind of get you started on your journey to really understanding your dog and yourself and your relationship. So those are two ways. I also have a podcast that I had you on, which
Yes.
was awesome, called The Dogs of Our Lives. And that's a fun way as well. Yeah. So yeah, the podcast, my quiz, and then just my website. So those
I
are
love it. And
ways.
I'll leave all of those links in the show notes so you can click directly from there. Definitely check out Chrissy's podcast because you have some wonderful guests. And what I love about the way that you're engaging with these topics too is like it is looking at the human end of the leash as well. It's having that more holistic approach. Like you're saying, it's about a relationship with our dogs. And I think that's so important and such an important shift in the way that we're thinking about working with our dogs. So I'm really grateful that you're having those conversations on there.
Yeah, I just feel like it's so important because if we start with, a foundation based on trust, all the other stuff, just your dog is going to listen to you better. I mean, and when we're talking about trust, we're talking about kindness, being, working in integrity, non-judgment of ourselves and our dog, um, being consistent and reliable, um, and kindness, working in kindness. I don't know if I said that, but just having this foundation of trust. If we do that, and then if we learn about our dogs just by watching them, then we can teach them, in a way that works for both of you. And then, and then if there are other skills that need to happen, like you can do that. But it's all about the foundation and building that trust.
Absolutely. And that applies to every relationship. You know,
Oh yeah.
we get to practice it with our dogs, but that makes our lives so much better in every kind of relationship.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests. And
Okay.
this is, you can reflect upon one of your dogs in particular, or sort of dogs in general that you've worked with. But what do you feel that dogs have taught you about what it means to be human?
Ah, well, I was talking about Zoe and Bill, the boxers that we had, and how we brought them into our lives to help us to be better parents. And I think just I remember too, like my journey first started. Zoe was doing something and I was so angry and I was getting, I was just like, ah, and I was just like, she needs to stop this. And then I stopped for a second and like all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, why are you feeling like this? I turned it back on myself and I was like, wait a minute. Yeah, she's doing this, but why are you feeling like this? And how can you interact with her in a different way? how can you teach her differently? And so that right there, being human and just being curious about ourselves, that's what she taught me, and that's what both of, our dogs taught us. And then that I passed that on to my kids, like learning, I just, in my generation, I think it was just a generational cultural thing. Like emotions were not allowed, punishment, like just, you just do what I say, and that's what it's like. And so there was a lot of suppression of emotions. And I feel like people do try to do that with their dogs too. Our dogs have emotions. And so I think when I turned it on myself and said, hey, you need to do this differently. How can you? So that was just started my whole journey of learning about how to be a better human myself, how to, have a relationship with my dogs in a different way, and then how to have a relationship and teach my kids in a different way. And they have just taught both of us that. And like our kids, they're 17 and 14, and they're so fun. Like they are hilarious. And there's been so many times where you start to go into this place, and I'm like, wait, nope, stop just a minute. Why are you feeling like this? And it's like when it comes down to it, it's just they're feeling a certain way, and so their behavior comes out in a certain way. So if I ask like, okay, so why are you acting like this? Or why are you, what's going on? What are you feeling? And so instead of like looking at the external behavior, looking at the reason behind it, and then once you address that, then the other stuff, like, so you build this relationship. It's just learning how to have a human relationship with another human or another species. And it's really being about, it's about being curious and looking deeper than the external.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you for articulating that in such a beautiful way. And also, what a gift that breaking cycles of like generational traumas that we all are, right? I think those of us that are awakened to this path, I think that's part of what we've been charged with. And it's not an easy path because
Mhm.
it requires that level of vigilance, like you're describing, of really being aware and stopping the habitual ways of responding to, or rather reacting to things, and how can we respond differently. And so,
Yeah.
what a gift that those dogs have given you and your kids and future generations. That's incredible. So
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
Aw.
Thank you. Yeah. I love it. It's hard, like you said, but it feels really satisfying. It's really good feeling.
Yeah, I love it. Chrissy, thank you for being on the podcast today. This has just been such a delight. I'm so grateful for your time, your energy, your wisdom. Thank you for sharing so much with us today.
Yes. Thank you for having me on and letting me share, just what's inside of me, and hopefully it helps someone.
Oh, it absolutely. Well, it's helped me. So that's one person. We're good, right? It will definitely
Yay!
it will definitely help other people. Thank you so much. We'll have to have you back on and continue these conversations because I think it's really important for people to keep hearing these
Yeah.
different approaches to working with your dogs and working with yourselves and normalizing this kind of a relationship with your dog. And I think a lot of people are actually looking for validation that there are other ways of engaging with their dogs. So we'll have to have you come back on and talk about more things, dog training, behavior, animal communication, all the good stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And if people are like, I want to hear more about this or whatever, I'd be happy to talk about that for sure.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Alexia.
Thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Chrissy Messick. What was your biggest takeaway from this episode? I'd love to hear. And what have you found helpful in developing your relationship with your dog? Where are you struggling with your relationship with your dog? Leave a note in the comments or message me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama, or contact me on my website, mysticdogmama.com. To connect with Chrissy and learn more about how to work with her, visit her website, theanimalnature.com. And definitely check out her podcast, The Dogs of Our Lives, anywhere you listen to podcasts. She has some wonderful guests that I think you'll really find interesting and helpful in your journey with your dog. Also, to let you know, I'm actively putting together some exciting new episodes for you, but I want to know what you want more of. You've mentioned to me before that you want some more information on nutrition, so I do have a series in the works for you on that. But definitely keep sending me your questions about nutrition because there's so much to talk about when it comes to what goes in your dog's bowl, and I'll just keep making more episodes to help you with that. And what other topics would you like me to dive into when it comes to nourishing your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul? Let me know. You can leave a note in the comments, DM me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama, or again, contact me through my website, mysticdogmama.com. Finally, if you're enjoying the podcast and haven't done so already, I would be so grateful if you would consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a review. This really helps me to know what you're enjoying, and it also helps other Mystic Dog Mamas and Papas who are looking for help and support to find the podcast and this beautiful community that we are creating together. Okay, until next time.